Welcome to Spaces, built by Bush Construction, a podcast that brings genuine conversations that opens minds to creative ideas in construction, design, and development. We'll share in-depth stories as an experienced commercial contractor and design firm, as well as our candid interviews with business leaders as it relates to the construction industry. So let's get started. Today, our third episode out of 6 in the Construction Delivery Method series, we will explain the Construction Manager as Agent, or CMA delivery method. We will also be tying back a bit to our last episode on Construction Manager as Constructor, or CMC, as there are some similarities between both delivery methods. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, it is episode number 6 in our Spaces Built by Bush Construction podcast. Following the format of our previously discussed delivery methods, today, we will be talking about the pros, cons, and which owner is best suited to the Construction Manager's Agent project delivery method. Thanks for tuning in. So this is our third out of 6 deep dives into delivery methods. Previously, we've covered the risk of the hard bid delivery method, the silver bullet of the Construction Manager as Constructor, or CMC delivery method. And today, AJ is going to take us down the path of Construction Manager as Agent, or CMA.
So CMA stands for CM as an agent. So if we're going to talk about this as a delivery method, it probably makes sense to start by laying some groundwork. Okay, so CMA and CMC, the difference is really related to the term professional services. So let's define professional services. So the purposes of our discussion today, the construction industry has really drawn a very clear distinction between professional services and construction contracting. Okay, so if an entity accepts the risks of construction, it is considered to be engaged in the business of construction contracting. If an entity does not hold the risks of construction contracting, it's likely considered to be a professional service provider. Okay, so what are these risks we're talking about associated with construction contracting? The risks typically accepted by construction contractors are vast, but are primarily related to guaranteeing that the overall project costs are achieved and also guaranteeing that the overall construction schedule is achieved. So, in summary, contractors guarantee that costs and schedule are met. Okay, so now we can start talking about how CMA is different than CMC. So how is CM as an agent different than CMC, which is Construction Manager at Risk? CMA services are considered to be a professional service, much like architecture and engineering services. Okay, so in this case, the CM agent, is providing professional construction management service without taking any of the typical risks of construction. Just like the architect and engineer don't take the risks associated with construction either. So if the project does not achieve its budget or schedule expectations, the owner holds that risk rather than the CM agent. So that's a baseline understanding of the things you need to know to understand Construction Manager as Agent delivery method.
So as we've done before, can you roll into some of the pros and cons of the CMA delivery method?
You bet. Okay, let's do pros first. One big pro is that there are a few states in the country, one of which is Iowa, where we're based, that don't allow the CMC delivery method or design build as a construction delivery method. So CMA, one of the pros, is that it's allowed by every government agency because it's considered to be a professional service. So it's always an option. That's one of the pros. Another pro of the CMA delivery method is that it actually becomes a way for the owner of the project to technically hold a trade contract or a supplier contract, but still have the construction manager, somebody engaged in the business of contracting, who really understands how construction projects are best manage and administer the work. So there's a variety of project-based reasons why an owner might want to do this. One example that comes up quite often is that the owner likes to buy direct. So in this case, the owner buys direct, uses their buying power to do that, and the construction manager coordinates the installation of those materials once they are delivered to the site. Okay, the cons. Generally speaking, it is typically more work for an owner to administer a CMA contract because they must issue individual checks, payments, to the contractors, trade contractors, and the suppliers in the project. So instead of once a month, the owner writes a check to the constructor, to the contractor. Instead, they're issuing maybe 20, could be as little as 2 or 3, could be as many as 20 or 30 checks to trade contractors and material suppliers, because they are formally holding that contract directly with them, with the trade contractors and material suppliers, and the money does not flow through the account of the construction manager as agent. So that's one of the drawbacks, is that it's a little bit more administrative work. The other big one is that the owner actually takes the risks, as mentioned before, on the contractor and supplier default possibilities. So if a subcontractor or a supplier goes bankrupt, the owner holds those risks. The construction manager as agent does not in that case. That's another big con or a drawback for an owner on a CMA delivery method.
So on the owner side, when they're issuing all the checks because they have all of those contracts under their name, how does that play out as far as change orders or any other type of request for information? Is it harder to get that information down the line?
So, good question. The administration for the owner should be no different related to construction change orders or RFIs, request for information, that sort of information. The construction manager as agent will administer all of that data flow just like they would have if they were a CMC, or construction manager at risk. However, the owner, again, takes the risk of the change order. So in the case where there is a scope gap on a project, the owner would take the risk on that instead of having the contractor to absorb that risk if there was a scope gap in the contractor's scope of work, in the general contractor's scope of work. So the owner takes the risk on change orders, but not the risk of administering the change orders, which is still done by the construction manager as agent in this delivery method.
One question / point of clarification. So when you're talking about payments individually going out to subcontractors, I just want to make sure that I'm right. Correct me if I'm wrong. We are still managing and coordinating all the work as if it were any other delivery method for the most part. It's purely a risk thing. I think the term we use is work managed on behalf of others, something like that. So you're a consultant, we're still doing all the same work. It's just the risk and therefore the money and contract is flowing through past us, so to speak.
That's exactly right. The work of the construction manager as agent is almost identical to the work and coordination services provided by a construction manager at risk. It's simply the who holds the risk on default and who issues the checks and the payments.
So if we were going to just group it all together as far as the construction manager as constructor and the construction manager as agent, I think maybe these two are where people get the most confused just because they sound so similar. But if it was just like a little one-liner, here's the difference. It is just the fact of that risk that now the owner is holding. And what would be the purpose of that? Is it just because some government agencies need to have that for their own protection or their own rules and regulations?
Yeah, some states, again, 3 states don't allow it. The reasons vary across the states. I think legislation in each one of those states is heading toward allowing this as a delivery method. The other 47 states have allowed it. But I'll tell you, I think in general, if I was going to summarize this, when to use construction manager as agent, it's only when construction manager as constructor doesn't work. For whatever reason, if that delivery method doesn't work, be it a state regulation or restriction, or be it a buying power where the purchase order must come from the owner rather than the contractor to get that buying power, primarily CM agent is only used as a last resort when it must be used for whatever reason.
So we kind of like to touch on some real world examples, AJ, some projects that maybe we've done ourselves in the past. And I know that you mentioned one earlier in your comments, referring to when a client needed to, or they had better buying power. Do you have a situation that you can kind of go into depth on that one? You bet.
I'll mention 2 examples that again I mentioned before. Buying power is one reason, and maybe state restrictions is another. So the buying power one, we were doing a hotel project. The owner had a relationship because they built hotels all across the U.S. and they've got a great ability to buy cabinets, casework at a lower cost than what we would have been able to buy it. So they actually issued the PO, purchase order, for the casework. It showed up on site, and we managed the installation of all that work. So that's a case where the buying power of the owner exceeded the buying power of the construction manager, and they issued the PO directly, absorbed the administrative work and the risk of that scope, but then the contractor, we, installed the cabinets, the casework. And then the other example, of course, is a school project. We've done a number of school projects here in the state of Iowa. The state of Iowa doesn't allow the construction manager as constructor delivery method. So the school, because they wanted to make sure they selected their contractor, the one that they thought would look out for the best interests, they selected us as the construction manager as agent. And in that case, again, it was that state of Iowa restriction that didn't allow them to use the CMC delivery method, and they used the CMA delivery method.
Very good. I think that really helps, especially just even getting those real world examples of the two main reasons why you would want to use the CMA.
Can you explain the fee structure between CMA and other delivery methods? How they work? How do you actually pay the GC versus how you pay the construction manager?
There is a wide variety of ways this can be structured, but generally speaking, the construction manager as agent and construction manager as contractor are paid about the same way. So they're both paid based on, quite often, a percentage of the total construction costs. Now, either one of them can be paid on a lump sum basis, but more often it's done on a percentage of costs.
Which is very similar to how you pay an architect or an engineer.
That's exactly right. Again, and those could be delivered on a lump sum basis too, but more often than not, they're delivered on a percentage of construction cost basis.
Okay, as I listen to the CM delivery method, it seems like we're kind of talking maybe out of both sides of our mouth. Like, and sometimes a GC can be picked on low cost and kind of a commodity, but that same company can also be a CM agent and a professional service similar to an architect or an engineer, where you're picking more on that professional service and less on the bottom dollar. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes to show that the services provided by a contractor across all delivery methods are very, very similar. Okay? So while picking a contractor based solely on price does not feel like a professional service, they are providing the same service that they almost the same service that they would provide in a CM delivery method. So you raise a great point. How can a commodity priced GC be the same on one contract that another, working for another contractor, another owner, they are a professional service? It's because the services they provide are about the same, but they're just delivered in a different way. And maybe contractors don't get the sort of credit they deserve by coordinating the work that happens on site, which is a very, very complex task, proven by the fact that sometimes they're hired to do that on a professional service basis.
Let me drill down a little bit further. So if I'm just working out of my garage, I have a general contracting business, I don't know that I would be able to provide those professional services, but what are they? What are those professional services that would be different that Bush Construction provides versus someone that is on a smaller scale?
That's a great point of clarification. Professional services, there's a long list of them. So the professional services that can be provided by a typical GC in a competitive bid delivery method might be coordinating the work on site and issuing contracts to trade contractors and to suppliers. There's a different set of professional services that may not be within the capacity of a typical GC to deliver. It's really just the services of a contractor. Some are able to be done by just about every single contractor. Some are really higher level service, professional service, done by firms that are really accustomed to providing CM services.
Yeah, like we've kind of talked before, when you're handed the instructions, like hard bid, if you're handed the instructions, everybody's kind of following the same instructions. And in theory, that's when you're kind of getting the same product that anybody can provide. But when you're writing those instructions, so to speak, that's when it requires a little bit of a higher level of service and I have to have been there before. And that's kind of the CM delivery. You're helping write these instructions on how to build this, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good point for another thing that the construction manager does differently than the GC. So the GCs typically on a competitive bid project, they won't identify in great detail all the different bid packages. They won't identify in the concrete contractor's bid package what's included, what isn't, what should be included in the earthwork contractor that shouldn't be included in the site work contractor, or separating the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, defining each one of those packages altogether. That's a lot of work for a GC to do on a competitive bid project. However, that is a service the CM, either agent or CM as constructor, provide to an owner on a project, just to make sure that when the bids come in, there's really good clarity on who's doing what on that project. So that's another great example of what a construction manager professional service might be versus the typical general contractor construction service.